Did you know that Martin Luther King Jr. once considered becoming a Unitarian? It's true. He had, after all, done his doctoral studies in theology at Boston University, in the very city that houses the national headquarters of the Unitarian Universalist movement. He had studied the works of the Transcendentalist Henry David Thoreau and religious naturalist and Unitarian theologian Henry Nielsen Wyman, among other philosophers. Imagine it. One of the greatest American leaders of our nation, someone committed to social change through nonviolence, a brilliant orator and organizer, a man who dedicated his life to peace and equality, a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Congressional Gold Medal, among other awards. And he might have been a Unitarian Universalist, but it was not to be. Before Coretta Scott King met her future husband in Boston, she had attended Unitarian churches for many years. Even after they were married, Coretta and Martin attended Unitarian churches in the area. Despite that fact, the Kings did not become members of any UU church because, as Coretta said, quote, "We gave a lot of thought to becoming Unitarian at one time, but Martin and I realized we could never build a mass movement of Black people if we were Unitarian," unquote. Now think about that just for a moment. Dr. King did not join our ranks because he was concerned that it would negatively impact his ability to relate to the plight of Black Americans. Negatively impact. What does that say about us? We, as Unitarian Universalists, have long been proud of our stance on social equality and racial justice. We have spoken about these things long before our association came together in 1961, but our words have not always matched our actions. The UU historian and author Mark Morrison Reed writes, quote, "Prior to the 1960s, most members of both denominations, that is, the Unitarians and the Universalists, had little contact with African Americans as equals, knew nothing substantive about their culture, and the awareness that they should be concerned with racial injustice and inequality was only slowly dawning," unquote. In short, our ideals were not revealed through our actions. The UUA only formed the Commission on Religion and Race in 1963, 8 years after the bus boycotts in Birmingham, Alabama, and the same year as the famous March on Washington, D.C., led by Dr. King, in which he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. In 1969, the UUA was nearly split in two when delegates at the General Assembly meeting in Boston walked out in protest of what they called racist votes. Our words then certainly did not match our actions. I think the reasons that Dr. King did not become a UU are important to us and something we should consider as we honor his legacy, because those reasons are as much about us as they are about him. Why did King turn away from the liberal religious tradition and instead embrace his Southern Baptist roots? In an essay, King once wrote, quote, "I came to feel that liberalism had been all too sentimental concerning human nature, and that it leaned toward a false idealism. Liberalism failed to see that reason by itself is little more than an instrument to justify man's defensive ways of thinking, unquote. In other words, we UUs tend to be more in our heads than in our hearts. More fancy words than compassionate action. King, of course, had been brought up in the customs and practices of African American theology and the Black Protestant church. In both of these traditions, God is relational, not just conceptual. For King, God was the force of love itself, and Jesus was the model of how to overcome suffering through love. What he called the three great evils of society, poverty, racism, and war, were to him failures of the human heart that could only be overcome through the power of love. Through this divine power, King believed all people were connected and interdependent. Because of this intertwined relationship, King felt deeply and strongly that hatred and violence could never be the answer to change, because those things only cause more pain and deeper rifts into the fabric of all life. Hatred brings only more hatred, and violence brings only more violence. And both do no more than create downward spirals of suffering. Only love, he believed, could end this cycle of anger and hatred. King himself said, quote, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." End quote. What this meant for Martin Luther King was that the only way to fight against the incredible injustices being done to African Americans was to wear down the hatred of others with love. He taught the people who followed him to not fight back in anger, but to resist without hatred. No matter what was done to them, they were not to return anger for anger or violence for violence. He depended on the long-term solution of nonviolence over the short-term fix of vengeance. He focused on the tactics of peace. He learned not in the academic halls of Boston, but from a quiet voice of a Hindu man who ousted the entire British government from his country, Mahatma Gandhi. King once said, quote, "Christ gave us the goals, and Gandhi gave us the tactics," unquote. Quoting from the Bible, King would often say that people who do this work of nonviolent resistance and justice seeking must combine the wisdom of the serpent, but be as harmless as the dove. King believed that hatred was its own burden that weighed down upon those who carried it. Those filled with hate will always be consumed and defeated by it. The burden of hatred cannot be used to defeat more hatred. What he was asking of his people was to fight hatred with love, to resist anger with compassion, to repel violence with a steadfast calm that seems almost superhuman to imagine, but that was what he said was required to build lasting peace and justice. He once wrote, quote, "Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our community at the midnight hour and beat us and leave us half dead, and we shall still love you. But be assured that we will wear down your capacity. We will wear down our capacity to suffer. We will say that right. We will wear you down by our capacity to suffer." There we go. "One day we shall win freedom, but not only for ourselves," unquote. Freedom, but not only for ourselves. That's the point here. What Dr. Martin Luther King preached about was something that touches upon the lives of all people, regardless of color or religion or economic condition. He called aloud for the freedom and justice of every human being everywhere, because he believed that we are all intimately connected to each other. Hatred toward one is hatred toward all. Anger toward one is anger toward all. And suffering brought upon one causes suffering for all. And each is a wound to the tender body of all humanity. The freedom of some can never be gained without the freedom of all. We all seek peace and justice and understanding and compassion. We all seek to be loved, but we let our fears overcome our need for love. Fear breeds confusion and anger and a desire to lash out against those we perceive to be our enemies. But the only enemy is the fear that fuels the rage, and the only way to overcome fear is through love. King firmly believed that the divine was at the heart of every being and every person, black or white, Southerner or Northerner, liberal or conservative. Our failing as a people, as he saw it, was that we do not see that innate divinity and instead focus on our own self-centered needs and fears. He used the term agape to define the kind of inner love that connects us all together as part of the same sacred unity. If you believe that as Martin Luther King did, that all people, regardless of color or background or culture or means, are equally part of the same being of love, then you must find a way to love in that same manner. Such love, said King, requires that we forgive those who hurt us. Such love requires that we remember that all people are capable of both good and evil actions, including ourselves. Such love requires us not to return evil with evil, but to do what we can to always offer people a chance for redemption. Such love resists the desire to seek vengeance on others, regardless of what they may have done. Such love seeks only more love, even in the presence of hatred. Anything else only creates barriers to peace. This type of powerful and redemptive love is only possible when we view the world as one being. It is only possible when we engage both our heads and our hearts. It is only possible when we can become both wise serpent and gentle dove. It is only possible when we speak about peace and then follow up our words with our actions. It is only possible when we act through and with and in love. In the name of that which you hold in your heart to be most sacred, may it be so.